New York City on a crisp Sunday morning in October. As quiet as a country village, as arresting as a portrait of a beautiful woman. New York on October 25th, 1981, the day of the 12th New York City Marathon. What started as a run through Central Park for the city's recreational runners has now become an international phenomenon. As our ABC cameras cover the 26-mile course live, you'll see a field of 16,000, male and female, young and old, fit and handicapped. They'll traverse the 5 boroughs, east side, west side, all around the town. The people of the city, meanwhile, will gather on the sidewalks of New York, 2 million strong, to watch and cheer the competitors. They come from every state and from 60 foreign lands. Right now, all of them are gathered at the starting point. That starting point far from Central Park and far across to Staten Island. There they are, 16,000 strong at the starting line, which is actually the toll gate of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. It's time for an event like no other. For the first time on network television, stand by for the New York City Marathon. The 1981 New York City Marathon is brought to you by Natural Light, the beer with the taste for food. By Exxon. We're Exxon, working on energy for you. And by the Citizen Watch Company. We're making the most of time. Well, there is that almost unbelievable sight of that mass of humanity gathered at the toll gate of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge as viewed from overhead from one of our helicopters. There are cameras in 2 helicopters, 2 other helicopters transmitting signals. As we said, we're really going to try to cover this one big. I'm Jim McKay at our ABC anchor position. Behind me, you see the clock set at 0:00:00. It will start when the mayor of New York sets off the cannon in just a couple of minutes and the race begins. Once again, there are 16,000 people out there. Now, a number of them, a small percentage, are among the greatest world-class marathoners. The rest of the people, well, they call this the People's Marathoner, and they're just about everybody that you can imagine. There's an 80-year-old woman in this competition, an 82-year-old man, a man with 1 leg, a blind man. There's a man who suffered 7 heart attacks and a double bypass. Many other unusual people out there, each with his own special motivation to try to complete the course, to go 26 miles, 385 yards through the city of New York. To cover this, we have 26 cameras. As we said, they're all over the place, and we'll be identifying for them as we go along. Let's bring in now, however, our expert on the sport of trek, one of the all-time great distance runners of this country, Marty LaQuarrie. How do you view this, Marty?
Well, Jim, the biggest question in any runner's mind, whether the elite runners or the runners in the back of the pack, is the weather. And it's just broken beautiful today. So that first question is out of their minds. They can concentrate on the race now. And one man that's got to be very happy to see the conditions down there is Alberto Salazar. Salazar has run 1 marathon. He won this race last year, and now he's predicting a new world's best. And as he's at the start, he has to be confident that so far his plan is going to work.
Okay, well, in addition to our cameras all around the course, we're going to have people. For example, Jim Lampley right now is at the starting line at the toll gate of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. Later, he'll be at the 59th Street Bridge, or Queensboro Bridge, to give it its proper name, and then at the finish line to interview the first man to cross the finish line and, of course, the first woman. But right now, at that scene, somewhere in there is our man Lampley. Jimmy, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, Jim, I hear you very well, and it is, as you say, a unique sight in all of sports. 16,000 runners here massed with their heels in Staten Island and their hearts set on Central Park. It's really fascinating to see how the people, as you call them, the runners who are in the outer lanes of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge, lined up like spectators to crane their necks in here to the middle lane, trying to get a look at Alberto Salazar and some of the other favorites who will be running well ahead of them. One atmospheric note, as Marty said, the weather is fantastic, chilly enough to keep everybody fresh. But last year, the wind was at the backs of the runners as they ran the 2 miles across the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. This year, it will be in their faces, so we might look for a slightly slower start. Jim?
Okay, Jim Lampley on the scene at the start of the New York City Marathon. That's interesting, Marty, that there is actually a bit of a headwind as contrasted to last year. Look at that shot from overhead. The actual temperature is 50 degrees, the wind out of the east-northeast at 10 miles per hour. There could be some rain later, but right now it's just about perfect. Stand by. We'll be back live. In just a matter of about 2 minutes, that entire span of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge will be filled with humanity. They actually will carpet it as they start this marathon from one end to the other, and that's about a 2-mile distance. The actual span is 4,260 feet between the huge towers. However, altogether about 2 miles. And there again, the runners mass for the start. Marty, I know you ran in this once. You started in 15,000th place, is that right? And where did you end up?
I finished 800th, but in the process, I passed a lot of old friends and passed about 14,000 people. It was quite an experience.
That sounds like Guinness Book of World Records material.
That's the type of a record it is.
Man who passed 14,000. Many of those people there aren't planning to pass anybody. What they're planning to do is finish. And I think Frank Shorter has said that a number of times, that the first aim of any marathoner, no matter how good he is to finish the race, because you're never sure you can actually do that.
No, there's many questions in people's mind today. For instance, Greta Weitz, the favorite in the race, has had an injury that's been bothering her, and it's been a last-minute decision whether she was going to race. And her question, the question in her mind, and she is the favorite and has set a world record every time out, just like the person in the back of the pack. She's wondering if she's going to be able to finish.
Okay, the second favorite woman, Allison Rowe, has also been suffering from an injury. Frank Shorter entered the race at 7:30 last night, so Frank Shorter will be running. Remember the man from Munich so long ago, it seems. Bill Rogers, who was scheduled to run at midnight last night, called our associate producer Peter Diamond, said he was dropping out because the deal with his sponsors was not the deal he had thought it to be. We'll talk about that a little more as we go along. However, Salazar, remember, is the favorite. Gomez of Mexico gave him a good race last year. He's in there. And so is Frank Shorter. Shorter, very much of a question mark, entering at the last minute, but you have to believe he would not be in there if he didn't think he had a chance. There is the cannon that Mayor Koch has fired, and the race is underway. The clock has started. Here they go. 16,000 strong. Now, actually, there could be more people out there. Would they allow them? But they turned down more than 25,000 additional entries. They could have more than 40,000 people out there, but they just couldn't handle it. Now, we would not expect to see the favorites going out. Out in front, very difficult for us to pick at the numbers at this point, but we will pick them up from our spotters as we go along. We would expect somebody will go out to sprint just to try to lead the race for a mile or two.
That's right. Somebody's out there right now trying to let their mother get a good look at them before Salazar and the big boys catch up. Right now, as Jim Lampley said, there is a headwind for the runners. So at this point, the Salazars and the Shorters would probably be content to let some of these early pace setters break the wind and draft on them. Also, the toughest hill on the course is this 2-mile climb over the bridge. So it's not really that important for Alberto or Gomez to establish a lead right here. The wind is a very big factor when they're going for a world best, but on the looking at the entire course, the wind being from the northeast is really going to be a crossing wind most of the way, which shouldn't slow them down too much, but should help to cool the runner. So I think looking at it right now, it looks like perfect conditions for a record attempt.
We have another top American distance runner, Craig Virgin, who normally would be in this race but is not running this year, on the moving vehicle in front of the pack. I don't know whether Craig Virgin, can you hear me now? I suppose not. We'll pick him up when we move along a little further along the course. But there they go, up the 28-degree incline of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. That's just slightly steeper, actually, Marty, than the Queensboro Bridge, which they'll reach much later on. Queensboro, though, at a 26-degree will look much steeper at that point, I'm sure, than this does at the beginning of the race.
Well, this rolling wheat fields or look of runners, they couldn't tell if it was straight up or straight down because you're packed in there so tight you can't see 3 inches ahead of you. And it's just an amazing feeling to be in with that pack. You would think that you'd be scared to death in a mass like that, sort of like running from the bulls in Spain, but you're not because they're all runners. You kind of feel at home with them, even though the people around you may have never met them before. It takes probably close to 3 minutes for the people in the back of the pack to even get to the starting line.
Remarkable, but there's not a feeling of claustrophobia in there, huh? It's more of freedom and companionship.
Right. It's, you know, you're in there with your shorts on and your T-shirts, and it's a much different feeling than being in a department store and trying to fight for some sale items.
There's a good look at the Narrows through which the Italian navigator Verrazzano sailed in the 1640s, little knowing that one day a great bridge would be named after him. That bridge has not been there nearly as long as most of the bridges connecting the various boroughs of Manhattan. It opened up Staten Island just a little over a decade ago. Now, again, a look at the field. What you were looking at a moment ago was 4th Avenue in Brooklyn, which will be the first streets of that borough that they will traverse. The only time they touch Staten Island, one of the 5 boroughs, of course, is on the start. They've all left, or just about all of them, have left Staten Island now. Here's a look at the whole group up in front. No familiar faces that I can see, Marty, so far.
Right now we have Louis Kinney in the blue with the gloves on from Ireland. He's a 2:13 marathoner. He's a legitimate lead runner now. I think it's sorted out. They've been running now for about 4 minutes, and the better runners have worked their way to the top. They've run just far enough now so that the high school flashes have not been able to hold this pace. They're probably running close to 5-minute pace at this point.
With a man from Ireland leading, it's interesting to mention among the many other sidelights of this race, there was actually a team of runners from Northern Ireland, both Catholic and Protestants, running together to make the obvious point and to have good sport together. Well, Salazar said he would have to average 4:53 miles to break that world record. We'll be checking on that and other things when we return live to the marathon. There's a graphic look at the first part of the New York City Marathon course, off the Verrazano Narrows Bridge into the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn, and then they'll go down 4th Avenue after taking a couple of quick, hard turns there, and they'll go on 4th Avenue, which is a divided highway, for a long time. The men will be running on the right, the women and the first-time marathoners will be running on the left of 4th Avenue, as you will be seeing. The time for the first mile, 4:55, so if Salazar is near those leaders, he's just about on pace.
Oh, I'd say they're more than on pace, because that first mile is one of the toughest ones, fighting for position, and it is uphill, so 4:55 is very good. Salazar and the rest know that the first 5 miles are important, but they wouldn't be too upset if they were a shade over 5 minutes. There's Salazar, number 3, right on Louis Kinney's shoulder, so the race has already shaped up.
He was the one in the orange shorts and the white shirt wearing number 3, Alberto Salazar, the defending champion, a man who last year came to New York to run in the first marathon of his life, and before coming said he would break 2 hours and 10 minutes and that he would win, and he did both. He has not run a marathon since then, but has spent a solid year preparing himself to run New York again. In the orange pants there, towards the right of your screen, number 3. He now says, and has unequivocally stated, that he thinks he can break the world record. The one thing against him so far, that wind which is against them. For him, the temperature at 50 degrees and the rest of the weather condition is really pretty close to ideal.
Yes, but normally heading into the wind like this, the lead runners would be happy to be behind. I noticed that Alberto's gotten out. He's very mindful of what happened last year to Bill Rogers, where Bill Rogers was tripped from behind by another runner. And Alberto felt that the runners in the marathon, who are so used to being out in a race with only 2 or 3 good runners, are not used to running in packs as Alberto is from running on the track. And he's very afraid of being tripped up. So even though he's got to push and push into the wind, he's getting out there where he can stay out of trouble.
Now, number 1 in the black pants, white shirt, just to your left of Salazar, is John Graham of Scotland. He is very competitive. He's a possible winner of this marathon. So it looks like all the favorites are going to stay up front there. Look at this. It looks like the end of a riot. It is actually just the clothes, the outer clothing, the warm-ups that the marathoners have left behind them. One of the huge tasks involved with this marathon is picking all that up and taking it to the finish line where they have to reclaim it. It takes, a couple of trucks to do that. They figure there'll be something like 28,000 pieces of clothing, and that about 450 to 600 of them will go unclaimed. They give it to charity. Again, a look at the lead pack with Kenny of Ireland in the gloves and the blue, still leading. Salazar in the orange pants, number 3, right with him, and number 1, John Graham. I haven't spotted Gomez yet. You see number 4 from Mexico.
No, right next to the curb is Solomon Chabur of Kenya. So some of the early favorites are up there. It looks like there's a lead pack of about 25 to 30 runners. No matter how fast they run the first 10 miles, they're not going to drop the pack. There's always going to be 15 to 20 people who can go out at world record pace for the first 10 miles. It's not a very smart idea if you know you're not in world record pace, because you'll pay for it at the end of the race. But if you want to win, you just can't let someone like Salazar pull away from you, because it's very doubtful you'll reel them in at the end.
Okay, Marty, here they are on the downslope now, feeling a little better, making better time after that long hill up to the middle of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, heading down toward the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. A moment ago, you saw a long, wide shot with a big street coming down the middle. That is 4th Avenue, which waits for the runners. And the first crowds. You can see the crowds lining both sides of 4th Avenue in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. Many nationalities living there, a large Hispanic population in Bay Ridge these days, and they'll never be too far from the Brooklyn waterfront as they run along this section, as a matter of fact. There's some of the crowds, and here, Salazar in the orange pants, number 25 in front is still Kenny of Ireland, Solomon Shabur on the right in the black uniform. And now, it had been expelled. A lot of people thought maybe Shabur would go way out in front for the first few miles, but they're not going to let him do that.
No, he seems content to be with the leaders. Here is the women's race now. Julie Brown in the blue uniform, establishing position on the far right of the screen. Julie Shea, one of probably the 3 top runners in the field. Julie Shea running in just her 3rd marathon with the red shorts on the right there. As you can see, there are a few men running with them at this point. Some of the slower men and some of the over 40 men started at the same point as the women.
I also spotted Allison Rowe running about 5th. The Japanese runner up among the leaders there, number 49 we spotted also is Takahiko Kikuchi, number 49, as we go back to the leading men. Remember, the women will be running in a divided part of the roadway for the first 8 miles of the race, and then it all becomes one race. Number 3, Salazar, dogging the heels of Kenny of Ireland. There, the motorcycle escort out in front, police car making sure that the way is clear. And the people very well behaved up to here. You're going to see the people of New York and how they behaved. You may be surprised. They love this race. They do nothing but encourage the runners.
Well, now the pack is starting.
And now the runners have come into the second of the 5 boroughs of New York City. They left Staten Island, but now they're in Brooklyn, and they'll be there for a good long while. The time at the 2-mile mark was 10 minutes exactly. Right on, Marty?
Well, actually not. The 2nd mile was a little slower than the first by about 7 seconds, so Salazar may have to go to the front and start to lead himself. The question here is, he's got a very ambitious plan to set the world record. He can't have any bad miles in that 26. He can't afford to run much slower than 5:05 for any of the miles. So he's got to decide very quickly if he's willing to go out there and start pushing it.
Current leaders now, we have John Graham of Scotland, who we spotted for you, and Salazar and Louis Kenny of Ireland. Malcolm East is also up there, and Solomon Shabur, whom we mentioned. There's the light overhead shot as they head down 4th Avenue. The crowds will grow as they go along. It's almost 5 minutes to 11 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. We went off daylight time at 2 o'clock this morning. Overhead, the Goodyear blimp by the Verrazzano Bridge. As we said, they're in the borough of Brooklyn now. You've heard of Brooklyn. You've heard of the people of Brooklyn. Why don't we meet them both a little bit closer now?
Let it never be forgotten that the Dodgers were born in Brooklyn, not L.A., and that the name originally was the Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers, named after the borough's old transport system. The Dodgers were Jackie Robinson, breaking a barrier and thrilling the many races that make Brooklyn what it is. Well, the only cheers heard these days on the site of old Ebbets Field are in the memories of the residents of Ebbets Field houses, which replaced the great old ballpark. Let it be clear that many trees grow in Brooklyn, which was first settled by Dutch farmers almost 350 years ago. Name your nationality, and they live here today with their ethnic culture and food. Name your city game, and they play it here. Chinese handball, stickball, anything you can play in a street. Brooklyn has colleges and a big seaport, but still it's mostly known for its people. What kind of a place is Brooklyn to live in?
Nice residential place. Yes, it is. Great, especially this neighborhood, Bay Ridge. Very good.
You can fish in Brooklyn near the starting point of the New York Marathon. You can go to Coney Island for fun or the beach. You can find almost any sport you want except skiing. You certainly can find a place of worship for the religion of your choice. Once upon a time, Brooklyn was a separate city, but that ended in 1898 when it became a borough of New York. Today would be the 3rd largest city in the country if all the boroughs of New York were individual cities. York district is heavily populated with Hasidic Jews, easily recognizable in their black clothes, beards, and side curls. They're a group of Orthodox Jews maintaining the old ways in the middle of a modern city. Think about it, and I believe you'll realize that Brooklyn always is thought of in terms of its people, even their special accent. We asked a guy named Ziggy what he thinks of the people of Brooklyn.
The people are more down to earth in Brooklyn than in any other borough. They're more human beings.
Nice place to visit, great place to live. Now, if only they could get the Dodgers back.
Okay. Just to meet the people and the places of Brooklyn. There are the leaders. And among those leaders now are not only Salazar, but we have Greg Fredericks up among the leaders, a well-known distance runner who, however, is running his first marathon. Now, a look at the women, trying to spot the numbers. Greta Weitz is among the leaders. Greta wearing number F1. Also, Allison Rowe is up there. Carol Gould.
Well, right now, Greta is content to be in the back, having some doubts about her shin. She has some very bad shin splints. She's probably very content to go out easily and make sure she's warmed up. But the favorites have found their way. You can just make out Allison Rowe right behind Greta. Julie Shea on the far right just taking her first drink.
Now, the man out in front in the gold uniform, remember, has to be a first-time marathoner. Running on that side of the street at the moment with the women are only first-time males.
Well, if he's a first-time marathoner, he's going to have a first-time problem at about 20 miles.
If not before. Now the lead pack of the men again as they head down 4th Avenue. The people lined, as you can see, in many places 5 and 6 deep. And the crowds will grow as it approaches noon and they come out of their apartment houses and into the streets of New York.
Well, Jim, on that second mile, the pace was a little slow, and Salazar, seeing that, upped the pace. I can't say that he did it, but in concert, they all moved up, picked up the 3rd mile, and they are back on world best pace now.
I have a suspicion, Marty, that second mile time we got probably was wrong, because that would indicate they did the 3rd mile in 4:45, which sounds a little bit too fast, doesn't it?
Well, there's a lot of excitement out there as you come off the bridge and you hit the crowd, but I think you're right. 4:45 would not be smart, and these runners know their pace well enough that they would not jump down by 15 seconds. Again, the women, there's Julie Shea in the blue looking very, very good. And there's 2 men who figure, geez, it's a marathon, I must be able to at least run with women. Well, they're going to find out, if they're first-time marathoners, that they can't run with Julie Shea or Carol Gould.
You know, it's a remarkable statistic that historically in this race, that of the first-time marathoners, 90% of them finished the whole course. That really startled me to hear. It's surprising.
Well, that's the state of the sport today. To get into the New York Marathon, you have to be very serious about being accepted, because it's not very easy. You have to postmark your envelope and be very lucky. So it takes a lot of skill just to be accepted to those 15,000 people.
Okay, now that time of 10 minutes for the second mile has been confirmed from 2 different sources, so they did, in fact, do the 3rd mile in 4:45.
Well, that's very unusual. There probably have not been very many miles run at any point in a marathon of this class where the runners jump 20 seconds in 1 mile. So I'd have to say that Salazar, somebody there, is very serious about not letting that record slip away. John Graham is right with Salazar, and Kurt Pfeffer, the tallest man in the field right there, number 7, is the man who set that very fast pace 2 years ago, and Bill Rogers just managed to catch him over the last 3 or 4 miles. So we've got some good men up there who aren't afraid to go out and lead.
Okay, in a black uniform in the left, partially blocked, number 18 is Malcolm East. He's a contender. Still out in front from Ireland, Mr. Kenny. He has taken off the gloves. Well, he's getting serious.
Well, it's very important to keep your hands warm at the start and before the start. Even the top runners who are brought in fairly late have had to stand around at the start for quite a while. Now, Louis seems to me to be not very relaxed. He's using his arms quite a bit. He likes to lead. He likes to go out and give it all he has. But some days, if your concentration isn't there, you just can't run the pace that you think you might. So Louis, in contrast to someone like Graham, number 1, look at his hands. They're barely moving. He seems to be chatting with Alberto. I noticed in a press conference that John said that if the pace is lagging and the world record is slipping away, he would not be opposed to helping Alberto with the pace. So I think the 2 leaders there may be making a decision. Do we go out with these madmen, Malcolm East and Louis Kinney, who now seem to be forcing the pace much faster than they might want to, than the leaders want to at this point?
By the way, Gomez is in that first pack now, too. Rodolfo Gomez, number 4 from Mexico, who finished second last year. So we have the favorites. John Graham, Salazar, Gomez are all right up there, just behind the first 2. As we continue our live coverage of the New York City Marathon on this October 25th, there's a look at where we are just about now. We have a camera on top of the Bay Ridge Towers, which is a 38-story apartment complex. That will be looking down 4th Avenue, along with the other cameras closer to the scene on the moving vehicle. There's the shot from the Bay Ridge Towers. That is 4th Avenue with the divider in the middle. On the left of your screen are the men runners, and on the right, the women and the first-time marathoners. Time for the 4-mile mark as you look at the Williamsburg area where they're waiting for the runners. The crowd beginning to grow there in Williamsburg. That's still well ahead of them. They have the green light, as you can see. Here we go back again to the pack, and there's a spectator who tried to join it. Didn't last very long. That happens from time to time, but they have 600 marshals out there trying to prevent that sort of thing. But it's still Kenny of Ireland out in front leading the pack. The time for the 4 miles, the first 4 miles, 19 minutes, 30 seconds. Marty, they're moving.
Well, Kenny is 6 seconds ahead of the world best, but Salazar and Graham, we saw them chatting. I've got to be wondering about Louis. Now, Louis is a very legitimate runner. He's a 2:12 marathoner, but he did run a marathon just 3 weeks ago, and I think Salazar is content to let him go and gamble on the fact that he won't be able to hold this pace for the rest of the race.
The 4-mile time for the women, 22 minutes and 20 seconds. The leader is Julie Brown.
Roger. Okay.
Craig Virgin is on that league vehicle. I don't know whether we have communications at this moment or not. Craig Virgin, can you hear me out there?
Okay, Jim.
Yes.
Louis Kenny is still leading. He just took a drink of water. He's made a bold move here. We're not even 6 miles into the race, and he's decided to force the issue. Alberto seems to be content to sit back and let the pace go. We're just a little bit off world record pace. Everyone else seems to be pacing themselves off Alberto's shoulder and content to let Kenny go. Kenny, by the way, is the Irish national record holder for the marathon.
By the way, does he look like he could hold this for a long time, or does he look like he's forcing himself already?
It's my judgment that he can hold the pace at least through the halfway point, 13.1 miles. His lead is increasing now to about 20 yards. Everyone seems to be holding back in the pack because we're going through some pretty heavy winds at this point.
How bad is the wind? Is it very troublesome to them?
Well, I'll tell you that for the front runners, they don't have anything to block the wind except for the camera truck. So Louis Kenny has definitely got his work cut out in front of him. And I certainly hope he can hold this pace for at least a little while longer. By the way, his going out like this will help Alberto if Alberto wants to still set that world record in the marathon.
But the temperature is just about perfect, right?
Yes, although it looks cold out here when you're running at 5-minute pace or faster, you need this cold weather to keep you cool long enough so you don't work so hard and get tired before the finish. Okay,
thanks very much. That's Craig Virgin, the well-known American distance runner and marathoner who is on the moving vehicle just in front of Louis Kenny there, the one from which you're watching the picture. Now, should they maintain this pace, there's the 5-mile split, 24:15. Should they maintain that pace, they would complete the marathon in 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 10 seconds, which would easily be a new world's best. There is no official world record in the marathon because, of course, courses vary a great deal.
Well, the amazing thing is on Louis Kenny's record, he usually runs the second half of the race faster than the first.
He does. Okay. However, they've just gone 5 miles so far, and there are still more than 21 miles ahead of them. Again, a shot from high overhead at some of the stores and residential sections of the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. There's a good look at the leader, Louis Kenny. How's he look to you, Marty?
Well, he looks very good. Just by coincidence, I spoke to him earlier this week from my home, and he felt very good. He felt he had recovered from the other marathon, and his intention to come up here was to go out and run. He wasn't going to stay in the back of the pack and try and win with a surge over the last 6 miles. He had his intention set, and perhaps I bought his story about maybe I don't have a chance to win, but I'm going to give it a good try. Maybe, on the other hand, he felt he had a chance to win and could come out without the pressure on him and put a little surprise in the pack. But as Craig has pointed out, they're only 5-6 miles into the race. Plenty of time to reel him back in at this point. He is really, I guess you could say, going out at a suicidal pace. It's a pace that no one has ever held before, and what is going on in his mind, neither of us can really speculate.
We have no report so far on where Frank Shorter is in the pack. Again, if you've just joined us, Frank Shorter is a late entry in this race, entered it just at 7:30 last night. On the other hand, Bill Rogers, who had been entered in the race, he entered it just on Thursday night, dropped out about midnight last night. He called our associate producer, Peter Diamond, by telephone and said, Pete, I'm dropping out of the race, and the specific reason is because the deal I had with my sponsors was not what I had thought it to be. One of the things he said, this is what Rogers said, was that one of his sponsors wanted him to wear a logo not only on the front of his pants, but on the rear, and he said he wasn't going to do that.
Well, Julie Brown is leading the women's race, and she certainly looks very relaxed. She's a very established track runner. She has a lot of leg speed. She ran a marathon 2 years ago and set an American record, but has been bothered with injuries and other priorities for the last couple of years, so hasn't been a marathoner, and it looks like she's back, and she's very serious about this marathon race, because the problem in past years is that everyone just defers to Greta Weitz. Greta could have walked the first 5 miles, and I'm convinced half of the women would have sat behind her, but Julie has just gone out, and certainly is a good tactic to go out when someone else is injured. Don't allow them to get into the race, to get into the groove, to have their confidence grow, and Julie has taken the initiative to just go out and break it up. The last 3 miles now for Louis Kinney have been 4:45 each. Suicidal. He's got to come back, and he may look, it looks even here that the pack is starting to come back on him.
Okay, there again you see the people gathered along the side, the people on the sidewalks of New York, urging the runners on in the New York City Marathon. Well, let's orient ourselves again. There you see the Statue of Liberty out in the harbor on the right of your screen, the Williamsburg Bank. Now, we have a camera way up in there, I think on the 14th or 15th floor, something like that, which will be, there is the Williamsburg Bank building, and the reverse view that you will see will be looking down through Brooklyn towards the runners as they come along 4th Avenue. There, the vehicles out in front and the runners towards the top of your screen. The pack of the men on the left. There is Louis Kenny of Ireland, still leading. Behind him, there are Hugh Jones, Alberto Salazar, John Graham of Scotland, Richard Marjak of Poland is up among the leaders, Solomon Shabur of Kenya is still there, Paul Ballinger of New Zealand, and Hilario Alvarez of Mexico. However, those are some of the ones we spotted. Actually, there's a pack of 30 or 40 of them, really. They're still quite close together.
Well, the real race is really in the back now, because Louis Kinney is about 20 seconds under the world best split, so it's a very fast pace. He slowed down 7 seconds in the last mile. I thought for an instant there he was coming back to the pack, but that last shot showed us that he still has quite a lead, and he's not giving it up yet.
He certainly isn't. That world's best time, by the way, by Derek Clayton of Australia, quite remarkably, has stood up for more than 12 years. It was set in 1969, and with all the increased interest in the world, and particularly in this country, in marathon running, distance running in general, you would have thought somebody would have broken that by now.
Well, Clayton was a man ahead of his time. He trained much harder than any of the runners of his days, running 200 miles in a week. He was a very big man, very big boned, very strong. He could stand up to an awful lot of work, and he was training 12 years ago as hard as people train today. So it wasn't surprising that his record was so good, stood for so long. It was set on a very good flat course in Holland where they don't have too many hills. But 12 years has been a long time, and Alberto certainly thinks it's time for that record to go.
Okay, Julie Brown, by the way, has opened up about a 50-yard lead in the women's competition. However, 50 yards behind her are still Greta Weitz and Allison Rowe, Shea Christensen, and some of the others. So we expect that situation probably will change before the race is over. However, there is a question mark to remember, still over Greta Weitz and Allison Rowe, the two favorites, both suffering from injuries of one sort or another. So that'll be something to watch. We touched briefly on the fact that Bill Rogers talked about expenses. Alberto Salazar has said, when people ask him what he does for a living, he says, I run for a living. The idea of money in the New York Marathon has been very much a story of the week in the New York press, national publications, and we're going to be touching on that perhaps in just a minute or so, because we talked not only to Bill Rogers, but to Fred Lebo, the organizer, about that very situation. In fact, while we watch Louis Kenny, why don't we do that? Let's go first to the words I had with organizer Fred Lebo.
Fred, there have been investigative reporters, it seems, crawling all over the city of New York this week over the matter of money and the New York City Marathon. Are some of the world-class runners paid money to come here?
Well, we invite about 100 of the world-class runners, and they all get expenses paid. That's travel, that's hotel, per diem, and some of them get additional money for clinics or appearances.
We hear figures like $10,000, $20,000. That's a lot of expenses.
That's a lot of expenses, but that's the rumor.
The other statements that have been made, and more than rumors, people make it as a specific charge, is that you give prize money. Now, I know the business of expenses goes a long way back. It would be hypocritical even of a reporter to pretend anything other than that runners have received large expense money for 50, 60, maybe more years than that. But they say that you give prize money. First prize, second prize, third prize, fourth prize. That's different.
We treat the runners very well here in New York. And anyone that wins the New York Marathon or comes in second or third is benefiting from it, from a worldwide attention. And the promotional benefits is staggering. A win in New York is equivalent to winning Wimbledon. And now with the liberalization of many of the archaic rules, that will obviously benefit the athletes and the sport overall.
But you didn't really answer my question.
I'm not making light of your question, but it's a day or so before the New York City Marathon. My mind is on 16,000 runners and over 2 million spectators and ABC network coverage, and that's important to us. It's important to the sport.
Agreed. I have a feeling that the holes in your statement, what you've left out, may say something to us, too.
Well, it's the hole in the donut.
You weren't here all week, but it seems to me there's been more investigative reporters crawling around New York City this week than there have been sports reporters. It all has to do with the issue of money as relating to the New York City Marathon specifically. Now, you didn't come until the last minute. Was that the issue between you and the organizers?
Yeah, it was. It was. There's a financial interest in this sport for all the top athletes, and for me to put myself in the line after such a long, hard year, I wanted to be compensated, and particularly also because I've won here 4 times, and I felt I deserved that. And it became a real question for a while.
But now this is against the rules, right?
Well, the way that I'll receive my compensation, I'll be doing some promotional work for 2 companies associated with the race. And as for the prize money, if there's prize money, I would like a part of it, yeah.
Well, you won the race 4 times. You must know whether there's prize money or not.
Yeah, I'd say there is prize money, of course. But I think the thing is, in the past, I've never had access to the prize money. I had a separate arrangement.
So how would you define yourself? Amateur, professional, or someplace in between?
I don't consider myself an amateur, you know. I consider myself a professional. And that's as simple as that, really.
Well, of course, since that interview, Bill Rogers has dropped out of the race at midnight last night. However, we heard him say in those words, I'm not an amateur, I'm a professional. We asked Olin Castle, who's the executive director of the Athletic Congress, who's the ruling body for track and field in this country, for comment on that. He didn't want to come on camera, but he did give us this statement. Olin said, right now, except for newspaper reports, no one has filed any charges of misconduct against the New York Roadrunners Club in connection with the New York City Marathon until such time as we receive specific complaints or direction from the IAAF, the international body. Our framework will not allow such investigation. We have to treat such reports as hearsay evidence, something unacceptable in any court of law. But now, Marty and I have been joined by Diana Nyad here, who, of course, you know from long-distance swimming, but she's also a very good recreational runner and knows a lot about endurance, no question of that. But now, both of you, Marty first, you heard Bill Rogers say it, and you've been a runner, you've been around, you know there's been expense money for a long time. How long can this hypocrisy go on?
Well, I think the problem with the question on the New York Marathon, and Bill's problem in particular, is a two-tiered thing. Both sides are admitting that there's money passing hands. And if the IAAF and the Olympic-type people won't recognize the fact that money's passing hands, it's still going to happen. And what the disagreement, I think, between Bill and the New York Marathon is Mr. Lebeau would like to give the money according to where you finish in the race. And we heard Bill say he would like to be eligible for that prize money. But Bill also wants a guarantee to show up. And if the sport is going to be professional, then we have to be like golf and tennis. And if you have a bad day, you pay for your own hotel room. But you can't have guarantees also. You can only have it one way or the other.
But as of this moment, it's kind of Alice in Wonderland. Here we sit talking on national television. We know there's money, we know there's expense money, we know there's prize money, but everybody is like this. Diana, what do you think about it?
Well, I suppose the tennis analogy would be Alice in Wonderland vision also. I would love to see it open up to just be open races where there's prize money involved. You either take it or you don't take it. If you don't take it, you remain amateur. And the whole problem here is the Olympic Games. If there were no Olympic Games, I don't think any of these questions would be coming about. Rogers would love to run for the money, but then on the day of the Olympics, not run for the money.
That's right. That's what he said.
And, boy, that's having your cake and eating it too, isn't it?
It certainly is. This women's competition, by the way, Diana, shapes up very interesting. Of course, we've mentioned that both Weitz and Rowe have injuries, so a lot of things
They have
can
injuries. Julie Brown hasn't run well. Here she is right now. Hasn't run well since 1978, but she is about 10 minutes ahead of her own pace. She's around a 2:26 pace right now. She's left, I guess, by 70, 80 yards. Julie Shea, Weitz, Christensen, and a couple of others. You know, what's really fascinating about the women's races, you think about it, 14 years ago, in 1976, Catherine Switzer was no woman was allowed to run in the Boston Marathon.
They pulled Catherine out of the marathon.
Yeah, she finished. Her boyfriend gave him a little side swipe there, but her hair fell down out of the cap, and, you know, horrors that a woman was going to run it. When 10 years went by, and it was really sort of just a participation thing for women. There wasn't a physical ability sort of test until Greta Weitz came on the scene. In 1978 in the New York Marathon, and we were so impressed with not just her speed, she's proven herself on a track at 3, 5, 10,000 meters, but also with her mental composure. And she inspired a lot of other women around the world to train for this thing and to come out of the tracks onto the roads. And we have 20 women now running under a 2:36 pace, which is 6-minute miles or under. And I think now that it's been announced for the 84 games, we're going to see all kinds of quality and people coming out of the woodwork. The only damper on today's race, which is a shame because it may be the first time when we have a true world-class field and a great race going, is Weitz's injuries. She made no bones about it. And Marty was exactly right earlier saying that Julie Brown, right here, we just saw her leading, knows Weitz's injuries and is trying to take advantage and jump on it. Allison Rowe also not feeling well.
Well, you see, trees do in fact grow in Brooklyn. Not one tree, but lots of them. If we continue moving through that borough, there is Kenny still out in front. By the way, Julie Brown's lead, they tell us from the course, is now a good 200 yards, and that 7-mile split of 38:26 breaks down to a 2-hour, 24-minute pace, which would be easily a world's best.
Well, that would be the world's best by about 2 minutes, and it's interesting because there are graphs and tables and computer printouts that predict what the woman's world record should be if it was equal in quality to the world records on the track held by the Russians and the East Germans at 3,000 meters and 1,500 meters. And the computers say that right now the world record for women should be 2:24, and that's the pace that Julie Brown is going out at right now.
Louis Kenny, you saw 8 miles in 39:01, and there is Julie Brown again.
And this is a shame. The spectators who jump on the course, any few seconds that you're off the pace is going to be tough to catch that world record by the end.
And boy, she is looking relaxed right now. A 200-yard lead is something great to have, and to not have struggled to get it, because Louis Kenny, we've seen, has been working hard. He's worked to get that lead, but she just seems to be floating.
Certainly does. Greta Weitz and Allison Rowe, the favorites, well back in the pack. There's a water stop on Lafayette Avenue. The New York City Marathon continues live.
They won't get tickets. That's what's done now. Come on.
There's Allison.
Now we are reaching an important part in this race as Allison Rowe blends into the men in the blue uniform there, the blonde-haired woman. A significant point here by the Williamsburg Bank, where no longer will the women and the first-time marathoners run on a separate course. There's Greta Weitz in the red uniform, number F1, the greatest woman distance runner in the world, running with a shin sprint problem, however. And out in front of the men, here is Louis Kenny. Now, the fact that they have joined into the big pack of men, Marty, does have a great significance.
It certainly does. For Julie Shea with that 200-yard lead.
Julie Brown.
Julie Brown. has 200 yards on Julie Shea and Allison Rowe. It's not going to be as easy for them to get it back because they're going to have to weave through the men. I think that Greta is running very well at this point also. It's going to be a very tough race because it's only the 8-mile mark, and they are in a good pack. They're running close to world record pace, so any slight faltering by Julie Brown, who we see right now, could end up in a very tight race.
All right,
here's the problem for Julie.
Yeah, this was earlier when she was tripped by a spectator. That's a replay where we give you that, which could have, as Diana indicated, cost her a couple of seconds before she got truly back into stride again. Oddly enough, there's kind of a comparison here with automobile racing, Marty, because the idea there sometimes is to get out by yourself and have the other fellow caught in traffic, weaving, passing slower cars, and that's exactly what the lead women are going to have to do, getting through the pack of slower men. Louis Kenny, meanwhile, from Ireland, still up on the lead at a world's best pace time.
At 8 miles, Jim, Louis Kinney was 11 seconds ahead of Clayton's world best time.
There you see a vehicle right there with the clock that indicates to the runners exactly how far they have gone in point of time up to here.
Well, there's no question now that the pack is pulling them in now. The old rubber band effect, they're pulling them in quite well now. The 8-mile mark, kind of a important part in the race where the two races do join. It doesn't affect the lead men too much, but about 10 miles is where you have to start to doubt if someone like Louis Kinney is going to be able to hold that lead. So the lead runner's now trying to chip away at that lead. It's getting serious. At 10 miles, you'll have to see some big moves being made by Salazar and Graham. Up till now, though, they've had it very good because they're getting what they want. They've got the record pace. They've got the weather. Louis out there doing the work. Alberto has been able to relax. In speaking with Alberto, I said, what's the most important thing that you think about? I said, I used to think about keeping my stride short. He said, I just think about relaxing. I don't want any outside interference. I want to think about relaxing and being within myself. And that's the dangerous thing for Julie Shea, to be tripped. It's not how much it slows her down or even how much it tires her, but you get a little upset about it. And if it happens 3 or 4 times in a mile, you get very upset.
Okay, you probably noticed that there's a roller skater along with a lead pack of men. He won't last there very long. Somebody will get him out of there, I think. But to bring up to date on the women, once again, it is Julie Brown by 200 yards. Then we have Ingrid Christensen, Julie Shea, and Allison Rowe. Then it's another 100 yards back to Greta Weitz, whom we saw as she joined the pack.
It's probably a positive factor also for Julie Brown in the lead that she has merged with the men now, because she was running alone coming out of that 8-mile stretch there. And now she's at least joined some faster runners and is going to be able to hook on to a couple fast guys.
9-mile time for Kenny, 44:09, a 5:08 mile. He's slowing down. And in the pack, remember, Salazar, Graham, Shabur, and Pfeffer closely pursuing him now. We saw a wheelchair go by. Wheelchair entries are not accepted in the New York City Marathon. They say that's for safety reasons. However, there are wheelchair athletes out there unofficially competing on their own. Now, Salazar, remember, is still the man to watch. He's the man who won this race last year in the orange pants there, number 3, and the white shirt with the orange stripe. He has said that he not only plans to win this time, but plans to set a new world's best time. He's a very interesting young man, Alberto Salazar. Went to the University of Oregon, has only won 1 previous marathon in his life. He's only run 1 previous. Let's meet him.
Alberto Salazar has run himself from his Wayland, Massachusetts home to the University of Oregon to many of the great running tracks of the world. He's always been a distance man. For several years has been world class in the 5,000 and 10,000 meters. Last year, he decided to run in his first marathon in New York and declared he would break 2:10. He did, 2:09:41, and what's more, he won the race. But his story really started in his native Cuba. His father moved the family to the United States in 1961. Alberto told us why.
My father had fought with Castro during the revolution, and he finally left when he saw that Castro was leaning more towards the left and was becoming a communist. And the final straw, or the final thing which Castro did, which drove my father into bringing the family out of Cuba, was that he forbade my father to build a chapel in a small community which my father, who was a civil engineer, was building. And my father, when he saw that, he really saw what communism meant, and that he saw that if we stayed in Cuba, Castro wasn't going to allow us to practice our faith.
Alberto graduated from Oregon in June. Now, in his own words, runs for a living. He runs a lot. More than 100 miles a week training for today's race, much of it, in a runner's term, high-quality work. Oregon coach Bill Dellinger explains that phase of Salazar's talent to us.
He is not afraid to hurt. He's not afraid to put in a lot of hard hours of work. I call it at Oregon the callousing effect. But Alberto has calloused himself in training to where he can handle a lot more in competition than the average person.
At least once, he overextended himself. After finishing 10th in a road race in Falmouth, Mass. in 1978, he collapsed and was rushed to a hospital with a temperature of 108 degrees. There were fears for his life, but he made it. He's a determined young man. He has experimented with swimming as a training aid, once went all the way to Kenya to try high-altitude training. Anything to improve his strength and endurance. Weight training is a favorite exercise. Alberto told us about that.
I usually don't do weight training during the entire year. I usually do it for 2-3 months intervals or so. I just feel it's something good for the off season and also before the marathon when I want to try and get my whole body in very good shape because 26 miles tends to wear out the whole body. The whole body gets tired and sore, the arms, shoulders, everything, just because you're moving for so long.
Can Alberto Salazar beat the world's best marathon time set way back in 1969 by Derek Clayton?
I think I have a very good chance at beating Derek Clayton's record in the New York Marathon this year. I think my training has gone really well, and I feel myself to be much further ahead of where I was last year in terms of conditioning and experience. So I'm not going to go back there with the strategy of just sitting back and waiting until the end and just trying to outkick the other runners. I'm going to go there, and I may not lead right from the start, but I'm going to make sure that the pace never becomes so slow that I don't have a chance at going at the record.
Now as we return to the race live, look who's in front. The man you've just met up close and personal, Alberto Salazar, number 3 in the orange pants. Just to your left of him, number 1 is John Graham of Scotland. Very much a factor in this race and should be all the way.
Well, a lot happened in that last mile. He ran a mile in about 5:07, and right away he was gobbled up on the field. Because at the 10-mile point, which is a very crucial point, a round number that many people key on, they were about 2 seconds under the world best pace. There's Hugh Jones with the bright red hair from England. Very good, tight pack up there in the front, but now the work starts. At 10 miles, the work is going to start.
All right, now again the time at the 10-mile mark, 49:04, and for 4:55 mile. The women's pace after 8 miles, 44:14. That would be 2 hours and 25 minutes. That would be a world's best. Again, Salazar in front, Sullivan Shabour in the black shirt on the right, John Graham in the white shirt wearing number 1. On your left, as you look at the pack, you're on the left of Salazar.
Jim, I have word now that Greta Weitz is evidently dropping back. Unfortunately, she's probably deciding whether she's going to finish. The shin splints must be bothering her at this point.
Okay, she has said all along she has been suffering. She's been taking physical therapy, but she wanted to give it a try. She decided yesterday she'd do that. You can't ask any more, but it looks like Greta Weitz will not be setting her 4th consecutive world's best time in the New York City Marathon. It's the only marathon she's ever run in, by the way. The litter of paper cups greets the back runners, the back markers. Among the 16,000 here, as we said, people with so many different motivation, in each brain a different reason for wanting to do it, to finish 26 miles, 385 yards. There, a wide look at the borough of Brooklyn. Later, remember, they'll be in Manhattan. They'll go into the Bronx, back into Manhattan again, through Central Park, along Central Park South, and the crowds will grow and grow as the field nears that. One of the biggest crowds will be when they come off the 59th Street or Queensboro Bridge. Right now, though, they're still in Brooklyn, and the leader is the defending champion. Again, a graphic look. They have passed that Williamsburg Bank. They're headed for the halfway point, which is at the Pulaski Bridge, precisely at that point. In the streets, from the moving camera on the vehicle, the leader is still Alberto Salazar. John Graham, number 1, to the left. Still, as you look at them, Solomon Shabour in the black uniform on the right as you look at them. And that's still Malcolm East on the left of your screen, number 18, up with the lead pack, in fact, taking the lead again. Dropping back, however, is the early leader, Louis Kenny of Ireland. He has had his minutes in the sun. 11 miles in 53 minutes.
Roger, I'm ready to take it.
And in that lead pack, we have East and we have John Graham. Salazar, as we said. Gomez of Mexico is also among the leaders. Pfeffer, who led this race 2 years ago, almost stole it. Ballinger of New Zealand, Sakamoto of Japan, Marzek of Poland, and Shabur, we mentioned, from Kenya. Craig Virgin is down on the lead vehicle. Craig, do you hear me?
Yes, Jim, we can hear you fine.
Anybody significant that we have not mentioned that's in that lead pack that possibly we can't see?
Okay, I'm going to describe the lead pack the best that I can see it. First of all, John Graham from Great Britain, Alberto Salazar from the U.S., Malcolm East from Great Britain, Jose Gomez from Mexico, who's the national 10,000-meter record holder, another Gomez from Mexico, who's the marathoner, Salomon Shabur from Kenya, Simonsen from Norway, Toivola from Finland, Ballinger from New Zealand, Marczak from Poland, Jones from Great Britain, and Kirk Pfeffer is number 7 at the tail end of the lead pack. He's from the U.S.
What is your assessment of the race at this point and the condition of the leaders?
Malcolm East seems to be relaxed, but he ran the Columbus Bank 1 marathon just 2 weeks ago. John Graham, Alberto Salazar look very fresh. Shabur is very relaxed, but he's from Africa. I don't think he likes the cold weather very much.
Okay, thank you. Craig Virgin right out there in the lead vehicle. The 11-mile time for the men, 53 minutes, 58 seconds. For the women, 9 miles, 49:43 for Brown. For Rowe and Veitz, 50 minutes and 10 seconds. And for Christensen, 50:23. Those are the statistics as we proceed through the streets of Brooklyn. Boy, there are a lot of trees in Brooklyn. We've been seeing them for miles and miles now. It's a huge residential area, as a matter of fact. A look at the leaders. Salazar on the right of your screen. They're just on the world record pace, right on it at this moment, we're told. This is what awaits them, Manhattan itself. And Marty, you ran in this race once. As you said, you passed, what, 10,000 runners? Was that it?
About 14,000 runners, starting from the back of the pack. I know what Greta Veitz has ahead of her if she's going to try and catch Julie Brown, winding through those runners, winding through the mass of cups that they leave as they pass the water stops.
I was going to ask you, though, are you able, while you're running in the race, as you did, to absorb any of the feeling and the ambiance of the different boroughs and of Manhattan and so forth?
Well, on that particular day, I was running about 3-hour pace, so I was. It was a tremendous experience, and you said there's so many trees in Brooklyn. There have been people that have lived in Manhattan or Brooklyn all their lives, and they say, you know, I never noticed that that church looked exactly like that before. It's kind of really a way when you're running at peak efficiency, you're in great shape. Sometimes you do notice that the trees are more colorful and notice things you never did before.
I know that you always particularly like to run in indoor meets because you said the closeness of the crowd really turned you on and helped you to do better. You must get that feeling out here in the marathon.
Well, this is the important thing about the New York Marathon. Some people say there are some turns that could slow you down. Alberto says, no, the turns are no problem. We're going too slow. But the main thing is marathoning up until a year or two ago was such a lonely sport. It's one man usually breaking away from the field, running by himself and only finding the desire to push at 18 or 20 miles from within himself. But here in New York, when you hit First Avenue, when you're coming through the park and through Harlem, you've got a lot of encouragement, probably the type of encouragement that some of these people have never seen. I remember the first time I ran in front of 40,000 people instead of 300 people. I improved my time tremendously, and I think that's what happens in this New York Marathoner to all marathoners because they have never before run through the tunnel of people that they do here.
And you can see those people and you can hear them as they go along. There is the halfway mark awaiting them at the Pulaski Bridge, by the way. But the people cheer on not only that lead pack, but all of the people, all the way back to the last one in this huge throng of 16,000. They cheer on the 80-year-old lady and the 82-year-old man and the handicapped people and those who are running for their own private reason. One of them out there, a man who suffered 7 heart attacks, as a matter of fact, a man named Joe Michaels, and then had a double bypass, and only then began to run. He told me he used to weigh 220 pounds when he was 27 years old, smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, and was a drummer in a rock band making one-night stands. He said, I think I did everything I could to destroy my heart. He didn't quite do it. Eventually, had that double bypass, began to run, and is out there today. He's in tremendous shape, it appears, at the age of 40. As a matter of fact, I talked to Joe Michaels just the other day, and I asked him, why does he do it? Why does he run?
I got sick of dying. I wanted to get on with living. I wanted to get into the running community, and I decided to take responsibility into my own hands. I got into a good rehab program.
Yeah.
It was about the same
Along
time
with
I saw the
Rodolfo.
1978 New York Marathon, and it completely turned me around. Not to run the distance, but to participate in life, to share with the community, not just the runners, but with New York City. It was just a fantastic event. And I went for a bypass operation because of all the extensive damage to get more oxygen to the muscles that I wanted to use to run. And that really worked out well. I still had a couple of doctors that were sedentary at that time. I fired them. And all the doctors I have now are runners.
When you come under or hit that finish tape at the end of this marathon, can you put into words what it'll mean to you?
I think it's going to be the culmination of just about everything that's happened to me in my life, because I literally feel like I've come back from a death sentence. And I feel that just coming across that line is my sort of way of saying thank you to everybody, my family, my little boy, my older boy, that they stuck with me and they've helped me. And this was my way of just saying, I really listened to them, and now they don't have to worry about me any longer.
Joe Michaels, just one of the many thousands of personal stories out there in the rear pack in the New York City Marathon. By the way, the man who once weighed 220 now weighs about 130. The 12-mile time, 58:44. That would be a 2:08:18 pace, Marty.
Well, they've really gotten down to doing some work in that last mile. They were 4 seconds behind the record a mile ago, and then, oh, I can't believe this.
Can you believe that guy running out, interfering at the pace of the New York City Marathon, these men trying for a record, and John Graham, quite rightly, just shoved them aside. A dummy on the race course in the New York City Marathon. It's surprising, however, that there is so little of that. For the most part, this crowd, expected to number more than 2 million people on the sidewalks, behaves extremely well.
Well, already I think we've seen more incidents than in the previous 12 runnings of this marathon.
Again, a look at the lead pack with Salazar and John Graham and the others going on at a record pace despite the interruption. The lead pack of men heading down the slope on the other side of the Pulaski Bridge. They have just passed the halfway mark. We don't have the halfway time yet, but we do know that the last mile on which they were timed, they did 4:46. Incredible time.
Well, the pace was lagging there for the past 3 miles or so. A lot of changes, little slight changes, not very noticeable, but no one was making an aggressive move after they caught Lewis Kinney at about 8 miles. And the pace did slow down. They got a little bit behind pace, and they really made it up in one big chunk in that fast mile that they ran. It looks like Salazar at this point may be deciding that Graham is not going to help him with this effort, and it's time for him to take it on his shoulders. He's about halfway through the race now, and he may just have to decide to go it on his own if he's not going to allow that record to slip away.
Again, if you weren't with us about 2 minutes ago, there was an incident where a spectator ran out right among the lead pack and was shoved aside by John Graham. The half distance, 1 minute, 1 hour, wait, I'm trying to get used to these hours instead of minutes, Marty. 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 10 seconds. Should they maintain that, it would be a new world's best time.
Just a quick update on the women. Julie Brown is still leading, about 30 seconds ahead of Allison Rowe and Greta Weitz. Weitz is not giving up. We should keep our eye. As a matter of fact, she's up to 25 seconds behind Julie Brown, who's running a 2:25 pace at the moment.
Okay, in that lead pack of men again, John Graham and Alberto Salazar. Yuka Toivola has moved among that top pack. He may have been there all the while, but we didn't see him before. And Rodolfo Gomez, Jose Gomez, also of Mexico, and Paul Ballinger. There are previous winners. Mr. Murky was a fireman who won the first New York City Marathon in 1970, and the only notice that was taken in the local newspapers was about 2 paragraphs. I saw the story from the New York Times, and it just said, fireman wins first marathon. Little did anybody know what was being started on that day in 1970 when they ran, I think, 5 or 6 times around Central Park in that first marathon. Bill Rogers won this 4 times in a row, as you see. Salazar last year, with Rogers being caught up and tripping and falling during the race. This year, Rogers not in it. He was in it once again until midnight last night when he called us and said he was dropping out because he didn't like the deal he had with his sponsors. So presumably he's over in New Jersey watching on television at Tom Fleming's house. Salazar, the leader, along with John Graham. Number 1 on the left, number 3 on the right. 1 is Graham, 3 is Salazar, and there she is, Marty. What a sight this is. This does sort of beg your description, doesn't it? You're seeing views of New York in this unusual situation that nobody's ever seen before. And this is all live on network television. ABC Sports cameras there still at the start line, which was the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. They started just the other side of the toll gate, so they didn't have to pay. And here is the next one, the 59th Street or Queensboro Bridge. Most New Yorkers call it the 59th Street Bridge, I think, but the proper name is the Queensboro Bridge. And that is a long uphill stretch. Now, it is not quite as steep as the first one over the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, but they'll be well over halfway into the race when they hit that. And they say, Marty, and you've been there, that it looks like forever looking up that bridge.
But when you're running up a steep hill, you've got your eyes cast downward, and you really can't crane your neck to look up at the top of the hill or the crest of the hill, so you're just in there grinding up that hill. New York Marathon is not a bad place for hills. Once you get over that first Verrazano Narrows 2-mile incline, there's some slight ones, but not enough. As Salazar said, there really aren't any hills that just take your breath away. So it's a very evenly paced race, and Salazar now doing some good work. He and Graham seem to be chatting every once in a while, whether it's about the spectators that ran out or what the pace is. Sometimes when you're running in a race like this, it's very hard to hear what your pace is, and they may be checking with each other to see if one or the other heard the pace.
We're covering live the New York City Marathon through the streets of all 5 boroughs. The leaders right now are John Graham of Scotland and Alberto Salazar of the United States. They're running at a pace that, should they maintain it for the entire race, and they're past the halfway point now, would be a new world's best time. Again, there are no official world records in the marathon because of the varying nature of courses around the world, but the world's best times are very carefully kept, and that time could be broken today. It's a time that has stood for more than 12 years when it was set in 1969 by Derek Clayton of Australia. A little breakup on that picture, but by and large the pictures from these moving cameras with all the electrical interference in the city of New York have been quite remarkable.
By the way, excuse me, Marty, the flat nature of the course here in New York enhances the possibility of a world's best, because these runners who train on the hills out in Oregon or wherever are used to tremendous resistance. When they get down here, a 4:52 mile doesn't feel quite as bad as on the big hill.
Incidentally, too, Greta Weitz, the women's favorite who is competing with shin splints, she is injured, started to drop back, but now she seems to have steadied Diana at about 30 seconds behind Julie Brown, so she may not be out of it yet.
Even closer, 25 seconds. She evidently is running right with Alison Rowe from New Zealand, who came here to beat Greta Weitz. They're both behind Julie Brown, and Julie Shea is not far behind them, the talented young runner from North Carolina. So we've got a women's race going.
And there's the men's race right in front of you right now. Still John Graham and Alberto Salazar and Gomez from Mexico and the others that you see, all live on ABC.